My name is Sophia, and I will never forget the morning the truth exploded in court. They say betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone you trust, and for me, that betrayal carried a price tag of $25 million. I had spent a year and a half building the bones of a system that could predict operational bottlenecks before they formed, a kind of early warning radar for businesses bleeding time and money. I called it Sentinel. I built it in the quiet hours after my day job, in the glow of a second-hand monitor and next to a stack of coffee mugs. I kept telling myself I would wash tomorrow. I believed in it enough to starve for it. I believed in it enough to share it. That was my first mistake. I brought Daniel in when the world still laughed at my slides. He was charming in that polished, pilot-light way, always on, always convincing someone of something. He told me I needed a storyteller, someone who could get the suits to see what I saw. He said we were partners, two halves of the same engine. I wanted that to be true, so I made it true in every way that mattered. I gave him read-only access to my repo. I looped him into calls. I asked him to review investor emails before I sent them. He memorized my language, my metaphors, my floor plans. He never corrected me when people assumed we had built it together. He just smiled and put a hand on the back of my chair like he owned the chair and therefore the person sitting in it. The article hit on a Thursday morning while I was composing a pitch to a mid-tier venture fund. Local entrepreneur secures 25 Nandarsers deal for innovative tech solution. The headline read, "The word innovative blunted by overuse and still managing to slice me open." I clicked without breathing. The first paragraph described Sentinel with my adjectives and my data points, and even my typo, an extra space before a comma I had once caught at 3 a.m. and teased myself about in a comment. The second paragraph listed the company name Daniel had quietly formed 2 months earlier, a neat Delaware LLC with a website that looked like a template until you recognized your own screenshots inside it. The photo showed him shaking hands with men whose watches were worth more than my car, his smile the kind that touched nothing but his teeth. My body reacted before my mind could. I stood, then sat, then stood again. My hands floated above the keyboard like they weren't mine. I scrolled through the piece and saw phrases I had lifted straight from my notebooks, lines I had underlined twice because I was so proud of finding the exact words for a shapeless thing. Daniel had not only stolen my system, he had stolen my voice to sell it. I closed my laptop, then opened it. I tried to breathe like a person who understood oxygen. Betrayal is an earthquake that reveals the blueprints of your own house. You learn which beams hold, which walls were only ever pretty. I should have seen this coming when he started creating calendar invites with vague titles and not including me. When he brushed me off with a, "Don't worry, I'll summarize," and then never did. When he pushed me to sign an equity split for optics and insisted we'd revisit later. Instead, I wanted the dream more than I wanted to risk the dream. Dreams forgive too much. I didn't call him. I called an attorney I knew from a volunteer clinic I'd staffed on weekends, a woman named Mira who built her practice on small shops being crushed by bigger ones. I told her everything, every humiliating piece. She didn't pity me. She asked for artifacts, emails, commits, doc drafts, text messages, calendar invites, anything with metadata and dates. I could do artifacts. I packed a cloud folder like I was packing a suitcase in a burning house. Mira brought in a forensic expert named Yusuf who treated my laptop like a crime scene. He extracted commit histories, IP addresses, Mac logs, Slack exports, and the swollen graveyard of autosave files that never saw daylight. He worked without commentary, just nods, and when he looked up at me after 3 days of quiet, he said a single sentence I will never forget. "Your work is noisy. His theft is noisier." He pointed to a trail of cloned branches created from my repository under a masked account tied to Daniel's home network, to a series of file copies made at 01:12 a.m., 3 nights before the LLC documents were filed, to calendar entries that lined up too perfectly with the gaps in my access logs. He showed me the NDA Daniel had signed months earlier with a digital signature he couldn't pretend wasn't his, then layered on screenshots of text messages where Daniel gloated to a friend about streamlining a deal by reducing the founder count. The man couldn't even stomach the word theft. He needed a euphemism big enough to hide in. We filed a civil suit. We asked for an injunction. The court gave us a date. The night before the hearing, I printed my own evidence like a superstition. Paper felt heavier than truth because paper doesn't blink. I slept 2 hours. At 7:40, I dressed like a person who could not be erased. Hair back, simple suit, a pen my mother gave me when I told her I was building something that might one day change our lives. At 8:10, I stood outside a courtroom that smelled like varnish and old stories and reminded myself to stand on both feet, to let my anger gut me and then come back as something usable. At 08:30, the clerk called our case. The courtroom became a geometry of 4 corners and 1 center where the truth would sit if we were brave enough to carry it there. Daniel was already at the defense table, flanked by a lawyer with a blue tie the exact color of other people's money. He had chosen a suit that made him look like a young executive in a magazine, a little too perfect to be real. He looked at me with the kind of sadness predators mimic when they want to be mistaken for prey. I stared at the table instead. I knew if I looked at him long enough, I would see the first day we shook hands and confuse it with an apology that would never arrive. The judge was precise and disinclined to humor drama. I liked her at once. She asked our counsel to proceed. Mira stood with a folder that had grown into a small hill and began not with outrage, but with origin. She walked the court through the first commit I made to the repo that would become Sentinel, dated and time-stamped and linked to the private server that lived on a shelf in my apartment, because I didn't trust clouds to keep secrets yet. She showed my notebook photos with dates in the corner from the cheap scanning app I used. Sentinel VR.2 scrawled in black ink beneath diagrams that now sat in Daniel's marketing deck. She layered in an email to myself titled, "Remember the edge cases," that Mira told me was a godsend because the law adores contemporaneous notes almost as much as it hates grandstanding. She built a spine out of dates and facts and let the muscle hang off it. Then Yusuf testified. He spoke in the careful cadence of someone used to turning math into human. He explained hash values, permission trails, and why a file's creation date is a terrible liar, but a file system's journal is not. He showed how Daniel mirrored my repository 3 days before filing his LLC, and again the night before, he demoed his product to the investor who would wire 15 of the 25 million. He displayed a Slack export of a conversation where Daniel, forgetting what channels are for, pasted my code into a DM with the note, "Her stuff, but I made it sing." Yusuf didn't look at Daniel. He didn't have to. He looked at the judge like she was the only person in the room, because in that moment, she was. Daniel's lawyer tried to frame me as an overreaching collaborator, a hanger-on who mistook proximity for contribution. He used the word emotional 3 times in a single sentence, as if the syllables were lemon squeezed onto a stain. Mira objected when he drifted toward rhetoric, and the judge sustained so often the word began to sound like a beat in a song. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke slowly. I told the story in a straight line and left the trembling parts out because I didn't want pity and because the truth contains its own weather. I described the architecture like I would to a new engineer on her first day, naming the modules and what they did and how they spoke to each other. I explained the algorithm that made Sentinel different, the way it learned not just from events, but from the absence of events, the quiet that precedes disaster, the negative space where risk hides. I didn't mention the nights I cried or the mornings I wanted to throw the computer into the alley. I didn't need to. The code told those stories in a dialect the judge could hear. The moment the truth exploded wasn't a single dramatic reveal. It was a series of small detonations that sent dust into the air until the shape of the building Daniel had constructed collapsed under its own falseness. Yusuf showed the masked account tied to Daniel's. IP. Boom. Mira presented the NDA with his signature next to a clause about non-use and non-circumvention. Boom. The defense introduced a marketing slide as proof of Daniel's unique contributions, and Mira overlaid it with my notebook page where the slide had been born months earlier. Boom. The gallery, filled with reporters and curious lawyers who sensed a story, stopped scribbling and started listening. At the midday break, I walked to the water fountain because I needed to do something ordinary to remind my body it could. Daniel approached me with the audacity of a man who believed he could charm a mirror into showing him a better face. He said my name like an apology, and then asked if we could find a way to be reasonable. I looked at him and saw a line of decisions dressed up as accidents. I told him reason had been available to him every time he chose concealment. I told him I wasn't here for an edit. I was here for the truth. He blinked.